In this video, I'm going to cover how to take a sample for water testing. Now, what you want to do when it comes to taking a sample is to ensure that you're taking a sample that's representative of the conditions that bathers are likely to encounter. So I think the first thing to mention is that you should be taking the sample from the swimming pool rather than from the sample point in the plant room. Most plant rooms these days on commercial swimming pools are controlled, the chlorine and the pH correctant is controlled automatically, and there will be a sampler in the plant room that's drawing off a sample from the circulation pipework, running it through an analyzer, testing the chlorine and the pH, and displaying a result. And that analyzer will be linked to the chlorine and the pH correctant, and will be automatically controlling it. And on those units there will usually be a sample point from which you can draw off a sample of water. The purpose of that sample point is not to facilitate your regular testing of the pool water. It's for calibrating the probes, the sensors, which you might do once a week or once a month. Definitely shouldn't be doing it every day, by the way. I'll cover that in another video, but it's there for that purpose. It's not there for you to take your regular samples from when you're testing with the DPD1, the DPD3 and the phenyl red tablet. It's not there for that purpose. So don't take your samples from that point in the system. Despite what you're told by contractors, we often find that contractors are advising staff to take their samples from the sample point in the plant room. That's incorrect advice, and you shouldn't take your samples from there. As pool operators, what you want to know is what people are swimming in, what the conditions are in the water that people are actually coming into contact with. So make sure you're taking your sample points from the pool. Now, where in the pool should you take your sample point from? Well, it really depends. So what I'm going to do is just sketch out a basic sort of diagram of a typical pool. And what you'll have is you'll have some sort of outlet at the bottom. These are usually referred to as the sumps or the drains, usually down the deep end. And depending on what type of pool you've got, there'll be a surface water draw-off system that takes water either via a skimmer basket system or via, if it's a deck level pool where the water's coming right up to the deck and overflowing into a perimeter channel around the outside and drains into a balance tank, it will be going from the balance tank into the plant room. So there'll be a surface water draw-off system either way. But let's say for example you've got a skimmer basket system, and there's a lot of variation here. What you might find, for example, is a skimmer basket there, another one there, maybe another one there, and let's say another one there. But for your pool it might be different. But what you're basically doing is looking at how the water's moving through the pool. Let's say in terms of your inlets, this is where water, so basically water's coming from the skimmer baskets, from the sumps. It's going to the the plant room, going through the filters and getting chemically treated. Let's say it comes back via some inlets down at the shallow end. So there might be 4 inlets, and again, this might be different for your pool. There's no sort of standard way that all pools are built. It's variable. So let's say you've got your inlets down there and you've got your water being drawn off from the pool towards the deep end. What you want to do is figure out within that where there's going to be the most amount of chlorine demand, i.e. where in the pool is it most likely that there's going to be an insufficient level of chlorine, if anywhere, or the lowest level of chlorine in the pool. Well, it's going to be where there's most demand for the chlorine, where it's most polluted, because the chlorine will be getting used up more quickly in that area. Now, what you wouldn't want to do is, for example, to take your sample of water from anywhere in close proximity to these inlets, because what will have happened is in the plant room, if it's a typical automatically dosed system, in the plant room, chlorine will have been injected into the system, and that freshly chlorinated water will be coming in there at the inlets. So you don't want to take your sample there, because what will happen because you can see that the flow of water through the pool is going to be from shallow end to deep end. It's going to be sort of moving in that direction generally. And so as the water flows down, moves from shallow to deep, it's likely that the chlorine level is going to deplete, because it's being used up. It's doing its job. It's reacting with pollution and neutralizing it, but in so doing, it's also being depleted. And so if you took your sample from down the shallow end here, you might find that you've got a sufficient level of chlorine, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have a sufficient level of chlorine further down the pool. So that's the first thing. Keep away from the inlets. And what you want to do is move to a point where you think it's least likely. So as it gets further towards the outlets, it's going to be least likely to have the right amount of chlorine. And so I guess what you'd want to do is, maybe it tends to be up in corners. You can tend to get dead spots in corners. You can't see the pattern, the movement pattern of the water necessarily without using a specially formulated dye, which is sometimes used when pools are being installed and commissioned or tested for the hydraulics of the system. But generally you're not going to be able to see it, but you can kind of figure it out where there's going to be kind of dead spots. And I would say it's a good place to take the sample point from is either going to be here or here in these corners, since you've probably got good movement of water into these skimmers, or better movement of water into those skimmers, and that's going to be helping to circulate and mix in the disinfectant. But maybe up the corner not so much. So I think it's a good place to take the sample from. In this configuration, I'd probably opt to take the sample from one of the deep end corners, since to my mind that would be probably where there are dead spots or relatively dead spots in terms of water movement. I would say that would be where it's probably least likely that the disinfectant is finding its way to. But that's a very basic configuration. In your pool, you might have your inlets coming in all the way down the side of one length, and you might have your skimmer baskets all the way down the side of the other length, in which case you're going to really want to be taking your sample of water from over on the side rather than from the end. So it's a case of basically looking at your configuration and making a sort of educated guess as to where within that pool it's sort of like the worst case scenario in terms of disinfectant level. And what you should be doing as well is considering the fact that it's well known that most of the pollution in a swimming pool is in the top 150 millimeters of pool depth. So in a lot of guidance literature, it advises to take your sample of water from sort of elbow depth, but consider that if you're taking it from elbow depth, you're going to be going past and deeper than where that concentrated level of pollution is. Now, what I think is a good idea is to actually take your sample from within that top area of the pool where it's most polluted, because that's again representative of, you know, sort of bathing conditions that are a reality. I mean, people are going to be, you know, they're not swimming their lengths underwater. They're going to be occupying that top space. Their nose, their mouth, their eyes, their ears, they're all going to be occupying predominantly that top 150 mil of water where most of the pollution is. If I was a manager of a facility, I'd want to know that within that most polluted area of the pool, that's where I've definitely got the right level of disinfectant, because that way it would be a reasonable assumption, if I've got the right level of disinfectant there, well, everywhere else is less polluted. There's less chlorine demand everywhere else. And if I've got the right level of chlorine where there's most chlorine demand, then I'm good throughout the entire body of water. I think that's a reasonable assumption to make. So what I say is get your beaker and just scoop from within the top sort of area of the pool. I don't think it's necessary to go down and sort of go right down to elbow depth, because there is less chlorine demand there. So I don't think it's going to reassure you. It's not going to provide the reassurance that you've got the correct level of disinfectant everywhere throughout that body of water if you're taking the sample at a point where there's less chlorine demand than another point in the pool. So where, again, I'll stress, take it from where you think there is most chlorine demand. So scoop it from within that top, maybe go 100 mil down. So you are taking from within that top band of most polluted water. And then do your test as quickly as possible after you've taken the sample. Don't cause there to be any significant delay between when you take the sample and when you actually carry out the test, because of course as soon as you've got that water in your beaker, there are still chemical reactions going on within the sample beaker. The chlorine is still going to be reacting with pollution inside there. So if there's a significant delay, you're going to get a false picture of actually what's going on in the pool.